So Alexander Usyk once again exemplifies why he really is the elite hometown heartbreaker and problem solver in defending his unified cruiserweight world championships and Ring Magazine belt against a spirited Tony Bellew from the United Kingdom, a fight which took place yesterday at the Manchester MEN Arena on pay-per-view domestically in the United Kingdom, and DAZN was showing the fight in the United States. So the global coverage of the fight was quite widespread. The visual image of Tony Bellew laying spread-eagled with his head underneath the bottom ropes is an image that will remain fixated in my mind. Came at the culmination of quite a devastating knockout, but we'll go into that a little bit later. Now, slight unusual post-fight methodology in sort of giving a breakdown of the fight. Now, I was on a podcast post-fight yesterday, straight after the fight, and one or two individuals were conveying the opinion that, you know, Usyk was being outboxed for a certain period or Now, I want to try and present a counter argument, and I'll leave it down to the audience, you know, yourself, my subscribers, or the widespread YouTube community to either corroborate what I am presenting in terms of a counter argument, or whether there was actual validity in this notion that Usyk was being outboxed. Now, constructing a way of winning a fight, or getting into a fight, one can utilize various different aspects. Now, Alexander is somebody who can alternate between a boxer and a fighter and change at will, and both of those aspects are pretty much prominent in a lot of his fights. He may start off as a boxer. Once he establishes a rhythm and has understood his opponent, he can make that transition into a fighter. But he can also go back to adopting more of a boxing position at any point. And that versatility is what really separates him from most boxers around the world. And that is why I feel he is not only a pound for pound level number one caliber fighter, but I think he's one of the best fighters I've ever seen. And I'm a boxing historian. I can go back even before the 19th century in terms of fighters. Now, the fight ended in the 8th round, as aforementioned, further to a knockout blow delivered from Usyk, who the boxing community had typecasted as a boxer and not as a puncher or a fighter. So it dispelled that particular incorrect sort of assumption. Now, let's get into the technical aspects of the fight. Now, when people say Usyk was being outboxed, now, yes, Usyk clearly lost the first 3 rounds. Now, Tony Bellew elected to plant his feet up against, pretty much against, up against the ropes. Minimal sort of movement, a little bit of sort of lateral movement up around the sort of ropes. He didn't try and box into the contest. And we've seen Bellew when he started off his campaigning at light heavyweight. He was quite a sort of rudimentary boxer slugger. Up when he fought Oval Mackenzie, he showed a little bit of fighting on the back foot as well. So a smart boxer. He does have, ring IQ, a little bit better than superficially, if you've never really seen him before. He has a good boxing education from, as we discussed in the prediction video. He's fought around the world, he's fought different styles. So now Bellew's objective therefore was not to try and initiate the fight, but to try and bring Usyk onto him and try and make Usyk walk in or lunge in or leap into power punches, lead power punches, very much designed to try and knock Usyk out. That was Bellew's proclivity, his modus operandi going into this fight. No surprise there. Bellew, in the press conferences and all of the Sky Sports, Q&A sessions, whatever, he was under no illusion that he had the ability to outbox Usyk. He knew he had to knock him out. So we're not going to lay judgment on that strategy. That's a logical strategy. Let's just make that assertion right now. If a wise man knows his limitations, so if you're not as naturally skilled as your opponent, then you've got to try and utilize your strengths. And Bellew feels that he is a puncher, and his record certainly suggests that, although you've got to cross-examine that record very carefully. But 20 knockouts in 30 fights absolutely suggests he's a puncher. So a stoppage victory, knockout victory up against a boxer stroke fighter, yeah, a good strategy. Now, so Usyk had to initiate the fight, and we know from watching Alexander that he's a probing fighter. To accumulate, you've got to speculate. No risk, no return. So Usyk had to get his feet wet in going into the deep end. If Usyk had elected to stand off Bellew, just stand in the middle of the ring, there would have been no fight, and the crowd would have instantly voiced their frustration. This is pay-per-view, this is the prize fighting game, this is entertainment. And Usyk has desires, although Bellew, this was his last fight, he's not too bothered about the other invariables and intangibles. He wants to win the belts, whether it's a highlight knockout rule or whether it's an ugly victory, points victory, whatever. this is the culmination of his career. This is the climax. This is it for him. So it is all about a victory. Usyk is still trying to establish his name, establish that United Kingdom fan base. Once he departs from the cruiserweight ranks and moves into the heavyweight ranks to try and become a two-weight world champion and make a massive leap up against some of the biggest heavyweights that we've seen in decades, arguably even ever, if you look at it sort of pro rata. A very tough task for a 6 feet 3 inch 200-pound athlete. And Usyk is an entertaining fighter, anyway. He's an attacking, aggressive fighter. High work rate, high volumes, so you can say, that's his style, but he can stand off an opponent, allow them to come. He's better on the back foot than he is on the front foot, is my point, just to be a little bit more succinct. But he's had a little bit of troubles on the fighting on the front foot, as we saw with sort of Maurice Breeders. Now, this concept of being outboxed. Now, we all know Tony Bellew. Tony Bellew is a boxer that utilizes his jab. And if you watch Tony Bellew's past fights against Nathan Cleveleys, against the Oval Mackenzies, Edison Miranda, Isaac Chilemba twice, BJ Flores, David Hayes, Masterneck when he won, the European title, when he had a horrendous cut. But in any aspect, Bellew absolutely utilizes a jab, and his jab is vital in terms of setting up his power punches. Now, I asked the question, why was Bellew unable to establish his jab? Now, he won the first 3 rounds, so what? He ultimately got knocked out, so there's a means to an end, and winning 3 rounds is absolutely irrelevant if you've ultimately lost the fight and been knocked out. So let's explore that. Bellew was unable to establish his jab or even land with the jab with any sort of regularity. It is because Usyk established lead hand control from the first round. Now, lead hand control doesn't necessarily mean that Usyk was able to establish his jab and dominate and not allow Bellew to utilize his jab. No, Usyk was a little bit more cautious, but he was fencing out with his lead hand. He realized that Bellew had a low lead hand position, so he was fencing out with his lead hand on top of Bellew's lead hand. That is lead hand control. So Bellew could not get his lead hand above Alexander Usyk's fencing, probing lead hand. It didn't matter that the jab was not landing because Usyk was very cautious. He gauged that Bellew was standing in an attack position up against the ropes, not moving around too much, ready to explode with lead power punches. So one has to proceed with caution. Usyk, it's about distance management, not coming inside the pocket into Bellew's danger zone where he's able to, fire those vicious straight right hands to the body that can potentially knock Usyk out cold. The fight has just started. Anybody can be rocked and knocked cold. So Usyk establishes lead hand control. That pretty much neutralizes Tony Bellew's jab. So how does that factor into who's being outboxed. Okay, that's 1 point for me for Alexander Usyk. Now, I asked the question, what is Tony Bellew's signature punch? The punch that has resulted in most of his, if not all of his, 20 knockouts in 30 fights. We all know it's Tony Bellew's left hook. Now, Bellew's sequence of throwing the left hook is generally, if not most cases from my observations, is subsequent to a straight right hand, he'll fire his left hook. Right hand, left hook. It's generally jab, right hand, left hook. That is the sequence of his attacks. Now, I asked the question, was Tony Bellew able to establish or fire his left hand as much as he would have liked in the fight? Now, he did land a few left hands, but the left hands were minimal. Bellew absolutely would have preferred to have been able to have found a home for his left hand far more throughout, certainly the first half of the fight when he was having success. Now, why was Bellew unable to establish his left hand, whether up top or to the body where he does a lot of damage? He can cycle up and he can cycle to the head and body. You know, he's very good with that left hand. You know, it's a surgical tool. He has a very good timing, accuracy, and he can fire that left hand from a counter punch, not only as well as a lead. So it's an excellent weapon for him. Now, let's even change the question. What was Alexander Usyk doing to negate Tony Bellew's left hook? And the answer to that is, as well as establishing lead hand control, it is the way Usyk was exiting the pocket, you know, pivoting off to Tony Bellew's counterclockwise to Bellew's left. Not engaging for too much at short range, firing off his double jabs. Whether they connected or not, or just touch shots, it's irrelevant. Sometimes he would right hook off his double jabs, and that right hook would generally be from a counter punching position. Once he's done that, then he would pivot off to Tony Bellew's left, and that would cause Bellew's legs to square up, and you would sometimes see him stumbling on or just losing his balance up against the back ropes, having to turn to his left sharply. Now, once Usyk had pivoted off to Bellew's left, that opens up Alexander Usyk's left hand. It gives him a clear line of sight. But what Bellew was doing very, very well during the early part to try and negate Usyk's left hand was head movement and upper body movement, or head movement is upper body movement. Very good movement, and Usyk's left hands were not landing with any sort of ferocity. So defensively, Bellew showed good awareness and good ability to adjust when Usyk was pivoting off. So, in terms of outboxing, Usyk has done a very good job in terms of neutralizing Bellew's main signature punch. So, what did that leave in terms of Tony Bellew's arsenal to try and win the fight or even knock out Usyk? And that was his right hand. And credit to Bellew, he did a very good job with that right hand. He was firing the right hand specifically from a counterpunching standpoint. It was a very sneaky right hand. Sometimes it was fired from a shoulder roll, defensive position, and it highlighted one of Alexander Usyk's weaknesses, a lack of head movement. Just because a fighter has tremendous footwork, is moving in and out side to side, and also a fighter who has a high guard position, the one glaring mistake that these fighters might make is that they feel they don't have to move their head if they're operating behind a high guard position. Now, generally, a high guard position should be able to deflect, block, parry, punches coming straight down the middle, but you can certainly hook round a guard and you can penetrate the guard if you punch hard enough. Bellew was looping, it wasn't really a straight hand, he was looping his right hand. And he was looping it sometimes around the guard and over Usyk's high guard. And that punch was connecting. So Bellew was doing a tremendous job with the right hand. And also he was jabbing, he was using that right hand to the body as well. And he was having a great deal of success in the early 4-5 rounds, hitting Usyk to his pit. So Bellew was having success with really the one major weapon he could fire, because Alexander Usyk was neutralizing two of the other aspects, his jab and his left hook. And the other thing Usyk was doing very well, and it led to a critical component, it led to Tony Bellew, surprisingly, even he was surprised, it led to his fatiguing, was the relentless pressure that Usyk exerts from his movement, his activity, his relentless probing, his angles, his navigating of Bellew around, his lead hand control, so he's able to sort of turn Bellew around, sometimes even blindside him. So that relentless, Bellew really didn't have much time to sort of recuperate. He had to be constantly thinking, the concentration levels had to be, and all of those we know deplete, the energy tank. So Usyk in so many sort of covert ways is not only outboxing Bellew, but he is depleting his energy reserves, he's restricting his punch output, and he's limiting his punch variety. Those components, when you consolidate them, they are making real indentations over the long run. Usyk is investing not over a short-term period to try and reap a reward. This is a 12-round fight. He's not a first-round knockout puncher. He's not like a Julian Jackson, an Ernie Shavers. He's somebody who constructs a fight. And we saw in the end that he got his knockout, but it's how he got to that knockout position is what some people don't appreciate, and those who don't understand boxing make just absurd short-term prognostications that really do disillusion me, and to the extent that I really don't really want to record videos, but are compelled to do so to try and clarify the position, to try and present my argument so that the rational boxing mind can understand and can appreciate my analytics of the fight. So after conceding pretty much the first 3 rounds, and that is what Usyk did. Because he has a very good chin, he's able to shift from that boxing and start increasing his output and start making adjustments. And what adjustments did he make? Now, he began exiting the pocket at a different angle, and that is what led to Usyk being able to sort of slip to a certain extent some of the right hands that Bellew was landing. And another adjustment that Usyk made was that because Bellew had very good upper body movement and head movement, and Usyk wasn't able to find a home for his straight left hand, he changed the angle and trajectory of his left hand. It almost became one of those fisherman sort of paddle sort of hooks. And rather than hitting Bellew front on with a straight left hand, like either to his face, the nose, mouth, the left hand began striking Bellew the side of the head. He was aiming for the jaw, and that opened up body punching, and Usyk was able to start landing with his right hand to the body as well. So Bellew, from having to work tremendously hard to try and establish his right hand, so he was just firing power punches, and we know that power punches also deplete your gas tank. You're loading up on your punches at all times, so you're not having any breathers by being able to fire your jab, try and vary the speed and power of your punches to try and confuse your opponent a little bit. So Bellew's energy is already being depleted. Usyk is exacerbating that with his relentless probing angular attacks, and now he's changing the angles at which he's exiting the pocket as well. Now Usyk is also getting out of the way, or beginning to sort of slip and parry some of those right hands as well as land to the body. So Usyk is just attacking Bellew both sort of psychologically and physically from so many different positions. Just try and gauge that in your mind. Bellew now is beginning to gasp for air, and he's starting to get peppered with jabs. He's starting to get peppered with left hands. Yes, he's absolutely landing his own, but Bellew from round 3 onwards, one could say he was trying to steal rounds. For those who gave him the first 4 or 5 rounds, you could make the argument that Usyk could have been 4-1 down or 5-1 down, but no. If you really analyze, look at the fight, Usyk from round 3 onwards was starting to land the harder punches, and Bellew was starting to be visibly shook up by some of those punches. Bellew also made 1 or 2 mistakes in which he was trying to shift his position from orthodox to southpaw, and whenever he did that, his feet would square up, and that's when Usyk would pounce and land the straight left hand, and that's when the left hand was landing, especially to the head, and Usyk and Bellew would be, would stumble off balance, or he would be visibly hurt. So Bellew was making those mistakes. He shouldn't have done that. Whenever his feet would end up square, he would get caught. Now, Bellew at that point, the momentum of the fight had clearly shifted. Usyk was able to do that from a fighter who some deluded individuals feel was being comprehensively outboxed. Usyk was still able to make adjustments, and now was able to land with regularity, and was able to now sit down a little bit on these punches. Those left sort of fisherman sort of paddled hooks, very short punches, not with full extension, because he was able to get closer to Bellew. And if you look at the sequence in which, which led to the knockout, Usyk landed actually 2 left hands before. He took 1 punch back, landed a jab, and then followed up with, just a sensational, left hand on the side of Tony Bellew's jaw, and which, took him out. You could see Bellew lying there, his eyes had rolled to the back of his, to the back of his head, just looking up at the stars. Eddie Hearn on the outside telling Bellew to stay down. Horrifying images to, Bellew's promoter, to his partner outside, to his family, to the United Kingdom public. Just a devastating image. But good to see, Bellew, he got up. He didn't remain there for, the entire 10 count sort of duration, but it was a knockout. He got up after. He was very magnanimous in defeat, He just kept sort of, reiterating. It almost got to the point where he was just sort of repeating himself. But you can't be critical. He was, paying the ultimate tribute, to Usyk, who he emphasised was, the best fighter he had ever shared a ring with. And given that Bellew fought Adonis Stevenson as well, it's a great compliment. And Usyk once again has travelled, to enemy territory. Although the United Kingdom has been very fond memories for him, he's had it. In terms of success, he's had more success in the UK than anywhere else in the world. He won European and Olympic gold in the United Kingdom, and has defended his cruiserweight belts. And he was very Usyk on whenever he's delivering interviews is to some people it can be quite sort of annoying and frustrating, because he never reveals his true cards. There's so much wit and humour and sort of sarcasm that he sort of incorporates into his very short answers. He really is a thinker, a chess player, a problem solver. He loves his puzzles, and you can see that sort of mental arithmetic, and he utilises that whenever he's in the ring. Just an extraordinary sort of thinker, fighter. A scientific approach to boxing is what Usyk utilises. Not only that, but high degree of psychology as well. He's using all of the natural sciences to try and decipher an opponent, lure his opponents into a false sense of security that they're having success, but ultimately they're contributing to their own demise. And then Usyk will accelerate, he will transform into, a fighting animal, and ultimately he will end the contest and raise his hands as the victor. Boxing is far more complex than what the naked eye, there's, for every action there's a reaction, and there's different perceptions to to what is actually happening in the ring, both from the protagonist's standpoint and the antagonist. So much is going on. You can see that in the recent Nonito Donaire and sort of Ryan Burnett fight. More was happening than meets the eye. Donaire's punches was what causing the debilitating pain for Ryan Burnett, not any sort of aggravated muscle injuries but that's a different aspect. But so, in conclusion, I don't accept the notion that Usyk was being outboxed, and I've presented quite a detailed argument to stipulate my reasons for that. A very spirited effort from Tony Bellew. I'm not underestimating or downplaying his efforts in the ring. But ultimately, he was knocked out in the 8th round. Now, is that a good achievement? Given that Michael Hunter lasted 12 rounds and Murat Gassias lasted 12 rounds with less defense than what Tony Bellew was landing. So what that you've won 3 or 4 rounds, that you was having success? For me, that's absolutely... Tony Bellew was crying after the ring. He will tell you straight away that, that his efforts, his efforts were nowhere near good enough. It was a complete mismatch of skill and ability in that ring. That is heartbreak for him, and that is why Bellew was crying. He wanted victory so badly, but he simply didn't. It wasn't in his capacity. It wasn't in his arsenal. He just didn't have the ability. He was up against, just a naturally talented, athletic, strong, resilient, powerful, tremendous thinker, problem solver, just an extraordinary fighting machine, as what I would describe him. Mental and physical, just a formidable opponent, certainly at 200 pounds, the 2018 Fighter of the Year without any shadow of a doubt. I'm not even going to entertain any other arguments. Fighter of the Year, who now, at 31 years old, has the opportunity of cementing his name in the history books at the top tier level in challenging the heavyweights. And no easy task, absolutely. I'm not going to make just a reckless assumption that he's going to go into the heavyweight ranks and dominate. No. The 250 and 260 pound punchers, even Deontay Wilder at 220, 230, whatever, who deliver pounds per square inch at a much more higher ratio than the cruiserweights. Taking straight right hands from Tony Bellew is a whole different equation from taking right hands from a heavyweight fighter. For all the criticism that is attributed to Anthony Joshua, he's a world-class puncher and he's a world-class finisher. And we saw that recently with the Alexander Povetkin fight. Broken nose or jaw, second round, being outboxed, being outfought, but he came back and he finished Povetkin with some scintillating right hands. That's the dangers that are presented to Alexander in the heavyweight ranks. So he's going to have to improve his defensive skills, particularly head movement, guard position, when he's exiting the pocket, how long he stays in the pocket. The intangibles are, now he has speed and movement over the heavyweights, but once he starts to bulk up a little bit, how real, how acute will those advantages be up against fighters who are definitely less mobile, but because of their size and strides, they're able, and their reach, they have greater ring coverage. So, and Usyk is only 6'3", I think, with a 74-inch reach. So, and he's a probing fighter, so he's going to be at the danger end. So if some of these fighters who have 80-inch reaches are firing straight, they're longer than Usyk, they can get above his lead hand position. So it's a very difficult task. He could well get knocked out, but he has the ability to outbox them as well. It's a very similar problem to what Tyson Fury has with Deontay Wilder. Fury is not going in there to engage, he's going in there to outbox and frustrate Wilder. He has the ability to do that. He has the footwork, the lateral movement to do that. But can he maintain his discipline for 12 rounds without getting caught? That's the perennial question of that fight. And Usyk is going to be presented with pretty much the exact same scenario. Can he outbox these behemoths for 12 rounds without getting too greedy, too reckless, or get caught with a punch on an exit or even a lucky punch and be knocked out? Can his chin sustain him sufficiently so that he's able to implement his own attacks? Can he maintain that punch output up against the heavier punches? Will he need to do that? There's just so many factors to consider. But great fighters are prepared to. They say the smarter the game, the smarter the opponent. And one only gets smarter by fighting a smarter opponent. So you've got to go up, you've got to challenge yourself and see how good you are. If he gets defeated, can he come back from a defeat? That will be the true test of, and the true mark of greatness. Or can he remain undefeated within the heavyweight ranks and dispose and beat all of the current crop of heavyweights? We don't know whether they're still going to be around in 18 months or how quickly Usyk is going to get a title shot. There's so much to consider. But I certainly, if I was managing Alexander's career, I wouldn't push him into a title shot straight away. Certainly not against an Anthony Joshua. There is one argument that it's better to fight Joshua now as he's an improving fighter. But he's a far too dangerous fighter at the moment. Certainly at short mid-range. And he is getting better. We saw against the Povetkin that he was able to drop his lead left hand. Try and change the dynamic of the fight. He is, Anthony is an intelligent fighter. He can counter punch as well. So it's not an easy target. It's absolutely no foregone conclusion. So the Usyk fans and supporters just need to, calm down and really have a look at the game. Fighting these heavyweights is not only about that; it's about also dealing with the physicality. It's about dealing with fighting against much stronger opponents who deplete your energy by leaning on you if the fight is fought inside the pocket, applying their vice-like grips to smother your attack, whilst roughing you up with their attacks a little bit, landing little punches here and there if they cannot land any sort of long punches from sort of long range. So it's also trying to endure those physical and old man frustrating tactics as well. So yeah, it's that's why the heavyweight championship of the world was always, in the past conceived as the greatest prize in sport, any sport. This is the greatest sport in the world, the most difficult. American football and basketball and baseball and cricket and football championships are won and lost over 35, 40, sometimes 80, 90, 100 games. World championships in boxing can be lost in one fight, in one round, in a split second. Your career, your life can be ended. This is why this is the most difficult, the most complex, and the greatest sport, the ultimate sport there is. So anyway, that was corruption in boxing. I hope you enjoyed my sort of detailed, analytical breakdown. I would very much appreciate your comments, your views, your feedback, not only on how you guys scored and sort of analysed the fight, but also the arguments, the counter arguments that I've articulated in this video. This is all about interaction. This is also about sort of learning and appreciating the views and feedbacks of everybody. I've had some great comments on the Billy Joe Saunders videos, so I hope that can continue. So corruption in boxing. Transmission over.